Hello, everybody. Online and in the room. We have a nice crowd in the room today for a presentation that Robin Kobaly is going to get. But before we get to the presentation, I'm Arlene Montalvo. I'm the president of the local Riverside San Bernardino chapter. And I'm just going to remind you of a few upcoming events and also hope that some of you are joining us for the conference. We have our triennial CMPS conference in Riverside at the Riverside Convention Center in February. It's sold out in December, but there are some positions for volunteering for the conference. If there's anybody who would like to volunteer, we'll be sending the message out about how one can volunteer real soon on our mail trip, probably by the end of the weekend. And that's an opportunity to be at the convention center if you're not registered, but only while you are volunteering because of fire capacity regulations. Because we are pretty much at capacity, which is wonderful. So we have some upcoming programs in February. On February 21st, Chris McDonald will be talking about invasive species, how to identify some of our common local invasive species. This is a year where everything has come up with the rains. So you'll want to be able to identify some of the worst ones in your gardens and out there in nature if you're helping with groups that are doing invasive species removal projects. So you'll have an opportunity to learn how to identify some of these real problematic plants. And it's going to be an in-person only program because it'll be a workshop and we'll have a lot of plant material to look at, and people will be invited to bring in your weeds from your garden, but bagged so that you don't spread seeds around, okay? We don't want to spread these invasive species to our host location. So, and Jenny's there nodding her head. Thank you, thank you. And so the title of the talk is No, We're Weeds, a hands-on workshop to identify common weeds in landscapes and natural areas. And it will be here at the Land Use Learning Center of the Riverside Corona Resource Conservation District in Building 2, the one with the concrete floor, so we can clean up. And then in March, on March 21st, there will be a program by Don Rideout. He hikes around in the San Jacinto Mountains a lot and identifies a lot of the plants up there and knows a lot of the rare species. And so he will be giving the March 21st program. And then in April, on April 25th, we'll be having our annual native garden ramble, but it will be different this year. Instead of taking you to local homes, we're going to take you to two gardens, one in the city of Redlands and one in the city of Riverside. So in the morning, there will be tours at Caroline Park. And sorry, did I say that right? And then in the afternoon, there will be tours over at Bonomenio Park for the native plant area that our chapter has been very involved in planning and designing and taking care of. So all native plant garden areas. Then on April 18th, we're going to have a really great program on lemon lilies and their large pollinators by Kate Kramer and Gordon Pratt. And in May, we'll have an in-person program here at the RCD where you can bring your laptops and your devices and your phones and learn on the spot in a workshop situation how to use CalScape, take advantage of all the wonderful opportunities that CalScape has to offer, and CalFlora. So we'll have a group of people there helping to train you. Probably give a little presentation first and then hands-on. So that will be in person only as well. And then in June, we will have, on June 20th, we're going to have our election. So every 2 years, we have an election for our officers for this chapter. We'll have a new election slate, and only members will be able to vote, but we'll have that maybe an online ability to vote as well. And then we'll have a presentation by Melanie Davis on documenting rare sage in the Mecca Hills and Oricopia Mountains, which should be really fascinating. So that's what we have coming up. I'm hoping there will be some field trips in there somewhere that may pop up. So just keep your eyes peeled for field trips. Now, so the next thing is our program. First, are there any questions about programs coming up? And also I want to say, if anybody would like to nominate themselves for a position on our CMPS RSB board, like to get more involved, maybe if you don't want to volunteer for an officer position, there are lots of other positions where you can help support our chapter. And so just connect with us and we will talk to you and let you know more about it. We'll have some job descriptions available soon that we will share. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Robin Kobaly, who has vast experience in our local deserts. She worked as a botanist for federal agencies, I believe it was BLM, for over 20 years. And she's been involved in a number of nonprofit organizations. She's the executive director of one right now, the name of which escapes me, I'm sorry. The Summer Tree Institute. And she just has a lot going on all the time. She's one of our real important conservation people in our desert region. And so I'm going to let her come up and give her wonderful presentation. And she has a great book, by the way. I should have brought my copy. We could have showed it to. And here's some water for you.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you. It's great to see all you here today because we are fellow plantophiles, right? Plantophiles. Yeah, plantophiles. Phytophiles. That's right. Thank you, Tim. Yes. So being that we all love plants, we all know we see the plants above, but we know it's all happening underground, right? I mean, without the soil, nothing happens. So we're going to spend a lot of time with our hands all dirty, diving underground today and seeing exactly what's going on. This is specifically, I had done this specifically for the desert, but it all really applies here in the Riverside area too, and around basically Southern California. The only place where a lot of these concepts aren't going to really totally match is where you have clay. Clay soils are going to be a little bit different, but for everything else, this should very much apply. So I started out, my curiosity about plants and soil started out very young, and I started traipsing around the desert with my mom, trying to identify plants. And when we did, we had a copy of Jaeger's Desert Wildflowers, and we had a whole bunch of little colored pencils. And every time we identified a plant in his book with the line drawings, we would color in the plant. And my mom's goal was to make all of Jaeger's Desert Wildflower book in color. So I started really young. But when we were out there looking at plants, I kept picking up translucent rocks, quartz rocks, and looking underneath them, and they were always green. And I thought, what the heck is this? So when I finally got to college at UC Riverside, I started asking my professors, what is this? And some of them said, oh, that's just mineral. And I said, no, I don't think so. So then we found out you can scratch it off. So that kind of rules out the mineral. Well, fast forward to today, it's kind of just well known that translucent rocks in arid lands transmit light through them. And so there's a little bit more moisture underneath rocks because it's cooler under the rock, and cooler soil wicks moisture to it. So a rock is going to have more moisture under it than the surrounding soil. Now, what if that rock is also translucent? Then light can go through it. Now you have light and water. And what usually happens at the soil level when you have light and water? You get plants. So all of the little quartz rocks have algae growing underneath them. Now that's a pretty commonly known thing, but it wasn't for the most part. So that kind of curiosity has just extended into my life today. And I got very interested in what's going on with carbon underground, especially in our day and age when we have too much carbon up here and we need more carbon down there. So that's where we're going today. So this is supposed to actually, maybe I have to click this way. There we go. Okay. So today I'm going to take you on this tour of underground. We're going to start from the surface and we're going to go very deep. And some of the things that I'll be talking about today may seem a little bit like science fiction. They may be as curious as that green stuff under the rock that now we know is algae. Well, these things that we're going to be talking about today may seem very odd. Some of them may seem like we're on Mars. Some of them may seem like we're reading a Dr. Seuss book. But all this information I'm giving you today is actually bona fide science with real life terms that are being used today, even if you haven't heard all these crazy terms. But before we go underground, I want to start above ground because that's where this story and this tour starts. Because the plants that we see above ground in the desert are not giant redwoods. They're not, hundreds of feet tall, and they don't have huge biomass. They're very widely spaced. And for probably half of the year, if we don't get any rain, they kind of look like they're dead anyway. So the thing is that is so surprising is that all these plants, most of these plants are older than the huge plants we see in a lot of our redwood forests. But we just don't know that. Part of the reason is that a lot of them don't have growth rings that we can cut just cut open and count little rings on and figure out how old they are. So we do have some research that shows, though, how old some of these are. California junipers, for instance, throughout Southern California, are very old. We can count rings on them, and an average length of plant is probably 1,000 years, but they've been shown to grow to about 3,000 years. So they're not that tall, but they're giantly old. Next, let's go to the succulents like cactus. So cacti don't have growth rings, so we can't slice them open and count growth rings. So how do we get an age estimate on those? What we've done is actually find archival photographs, historic photos of places that we can still go back to the exact spot today. Let's just say a mine shaft and say there was a barrel cactus. And this isn't just to say this really happened. There was a barrel cactus that was in a photograph that was 130 years old, and somebody went back to it and the same barrel cactus was still growing. So there we know that it was at least 130 years old. We don't know how much longer because we don't know, when it started living. But that's the way we've been able to get some age estimates on succulent plants, such as cactus. And we've found out, yes, that cactus can be well over 100 years old. Let's go over to Mojave yucca. So that's another succulent. It does not produce growth rings that we can count. So we have relied on people who have a lot of patience for a plant that grows about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters a year, and to tag plants and go back year after year after year. Dr. Vasic was one of those Dr. Frank Vasic was one of those I was his teaching assistant for a lot of his field botany classes. And he had so much patience, and he would tag trees and go back year after year on field trips, and we would see how much the plants grew. So he did a study on a very ancient Mojave yucca in Yucca Mountain, on Yucca Mountain, north of Lucerne Valley. And he found out that the central stalk of Mojave yuccas grows for about 150 years. And then it starts producing little pups around the base of that, of that stem. The top one will start dying out after, maybe about 150 years, starts to showing some senescence, and these pups start growing. Now, the pups are not from seeds. They're actually the same genetic material as the base, so they are a clone. So those clones come up in a ring around the base, and then they grow up, and in about 150 years, they start showing senescence. And by that time, the middle stem may die and decay and create a hole in the middle of that little ring. So if middle one was 150, and the next ones are all the way up, and they grew to about 150. And you see, they're starting to show senescence, and they're getting more pups. You're going at about 150 years per ring. And by this method, Dr. Vasic estimated that the clone he was looking at out in Yucca Mountain area was about 2,500 years old. So that's 2,500 years of giving that plant has been doing for wildlife, for Native Americans that used to harvest most parts of that plant. And that one up there is still growing. We move over to Joshua trees. They're kind of the youngsters on the block. Of an old Joshua tree, maybe about 300 years old. They don't get as old as some of the other plants, but still they're no, whippersnappers. And then we go to things like California buckwheat, which is, a small shrub, maybe at the most 2 feet high. And the roots are so gnarly, it's just almost impossible to get growth rings. But I have colleagues of mine from UC Riverside that started doing tortoise surveys, like with Dr. Christian Berry, and have been doing tortoise surveys since the 70s. And so they set up plots and they monitor all the plants that are in there, and they know exactly where they all are because they know where all the tortoise dens are and everything. They know this whole thing. And just had dinner with another tortoise biologist last night, Tim Shields, if any of you know him. And he's telling me, yeah, he's still doing these tortoise surveys, and the same California buckwheat that were in the plots when they started in the 70s are still growing today. And they were already mature when they started this. So all we can say is, well, we know that those are at least 50 years old, but it was already that way, that big when we got it. So, the California buckwheats we know can live over 100 years old, but we don't know exactly how long. We have to wait like 100 years and get a photograph and go back and see. So then we'll go to creosote bush, which is kind of the daddy of them all for clonal species. And Dr. Frank Vasic worked on this as well out in Lucerne Valley. And I happened to be in his office. Well, I was in my major professor office. My major professor was Hiram Johnson, and Dr. Johnson and Dr. Vasic were fast friends. And I was in the office when Frank comes down and he goes, "Look at this aerial photo. There's rings here. I really think we've got to go find these rings. I think that they're clonal creosotes." So anyway, I kind of got to go out in the field with his teaching assistant was, or a field researcher and postdoc researcher was Leo Sternberg, now Dr. Sternberg. And so we went out and we found with aerial photos, we found that tree. We actually went around to every individual looking bush in this huge clone that they termed, Dr. Vasic and Leo termed king clone. And we went to every single bush and we pulled off all the leaves, and Leo took them back to the lab and ground them up, and he did gel chromatography, which is where you take a gel inside 2 plexiglass plates and you put your sample below. There's individual cells, and you can put slurries of plant leaves from different plants in the different chambers and watch as the amino acids migrate up the gel, and the heavier compounds stay at the bottom and the lighter ones move forward. And what you get looks like a barcode, but it's a chemical fingerprint of the plants. And every single plant around that entire clone was exactly the same. And the only way that can happen is if the DNA is exactly the same. So that verified that was one plant. And through a bunch of interpolation, extrapolation, digging inward, getting old roots, slicing what they could and counting the growth rings in the roots, and then seeing what that growth rate was, they determined that king clone was almost 11,000 years old. So there we have it. And when you stand out in the desert, when a lot of people stand out in the desert, they look out and they go, there's nothing here, and it's all dead. And what's so exciting about this? But if any of us went out and stood out in the desert, I would say that at least 80%, and it could be about 90% of all the plants that you see, all the perennial plants that you see, are older than you. And you wouldn't guess that because they're this tall. So, and one thing I wanted to say is that the length of life of all these plants is such that an individual plant could have contributed to multiple generations of Native Americans that harvested them for their livelihood, multiple generations of wildlife that use them, and other plants around them that actually are connected to them through this underground network we'll be talking about today. So we're talking about contributions to an environment over not just decades and not just centuries, but millennia by a single plant. And that fascinates me. So now we're going to go underground, and we're going to go to some different depths underground. And everything that's happening underground is really affecting everything that happens above ground. And first of all, at the soil surface, there is a living layer of microscopic algae and fungus and bacteria. In some cases, even liverworts and mosses, as a community all growing together on the top several centimeters of the soil. And the reason that they're only there and not lower is because these are all autotrophs. They make their own food. And what do you need on planet Earth to make your own food? You pretty much need the sun. And the sun isn't going to be down below a couple centimeters. So all of this huge cast of characters is all up trying to get enough sun and not get, what do you call it? Not starve to death with no water. I mean, where's the sun? But I can't get too much. I've got to have some water. So this is a little interplay between all these cast of characters. If we go deeper in the soil, well, first of all, that top layer of soil, not only are they contributing to the entire community by fixing nitrogen directly out of the air, taking a gaseous element that is very hard to break apart. And these little so-called, what do you call it? Primitive organisms are breaking these, bonds of nitrogen and breaking it up into fertilizer that the entire community is benefiting from. Also, their movements through the soil, through a process we'll talk about in a minute, are gluing soil particles together. So it is the biological crust living on here that, on our soils, that is actually keeping the soil little particles bound together so that they're not big dust storms and we breathe them, bad for our health. If we go down farther, it's amazing how deep the roots are of these plants that we've just talked about. The reason that they're so deep is that if they stayed at the surface where the soil dries out, they wouldn't be able to live there very long because, before this deluge of rain we had a year of almost no rain at all. So those roots, if they stay shallow, they're not going to live. They have to go really deep. And I have been, I don't want to sound like a plant killer, but I have been digging up plant roots, trying to just fall one root at a time to see how deep they are. And I have found that the smallest ratio of above ground to below ground is about 1 to 3. Like if there's an inch of plant above ground, there's at least 3 inches. If there's a foot above ground, there's at least 3 feet. But the ratio I have found most often is about 1 to 10, about 1 part above and 1 part below, which is why it's so hard to transplant a desert plant. Because if people say, oh, there's this a really small creosote, it's only 2 feet tall, can I transplant it? I go, do you want to dig, let's see, 2 times 10, 20 feet down, because you've got to get the end of the taproot. You can't do that. Well, the reason that those roots are so deep, that's where the water is. And that's not last year's water, and it's probably not the year before's water. It could be rain that fell 5 years ago. And those roots are able to get down to it. And that's how come creosote is green all summer when everybody else is saying, this is it. I'm going to sleep for the summer. I'm going to drop my leaves so my roots can stay alive. This is it. And there's creosote just pumping away, you know, green and everything, because the roots are so deep. Now, another component that can go even deeper, in fact, all the way down to groundwater, are chunks of cemented soil called caliche. And I'm going to tell you how this happens, that these chunks of layers are created through these long roots in the desert. So all this is going on underground, and it's an exciting place. Not only are these systems happening underground, but they are contributing to our welfare, to the welfare of their plant community, the wildlife community, humans over time, and humans today. And it's because together, these desert plants and the soil microbes are all working together to do all these things. They're preventing dust storms, like I told you about, by their cementing soil grains together. They're making a living glue we're going to talk about that's so fun, that is cementing the soil particles together, which prevents dust storms. They're also holding dangerous particulate matter in the soil so we don't breathe them, things as small as PM 2.5s, the particulate matter, the 2.5 microns. It's holding all that in the soil so we don't breathe them. All these plants with their soil partners are capturing and storing carbon in living systems. Even after the living systems die, we'll talk about that. Very cool. And we're underground capturing and storing carbon, both organic, but a whole bunch of inorganic carbon in a way that we'll talk about. And all this keeps just humming like a beautifully oiled machine until we disturb the surface. So we're gonna get out our little hand lenses or our little like microscopic things and start looking at that top layer of the soil microbes. So the microscopic algae and fungi and bacteria that are on the soil surface, they are, not only doing what I say, they're taking in sunlight, they're actually photosynthesizing, they're fixing nitrogen, they're holding the soil glue together. They're doing all that when the soil is wet. But when the soil dries out, it's like they all go under a spell. It's like Sleeping Beauty's castle. Everybody stops in their tracks and goes to sleep, and nothing much happens that we can see. There's no movement. But before they go to sleep, when the soil is moist, those algae threads want to move through the soil. They want to replicate, and they party underground when there's water around. And in order to move through the soil that has these very jagged soil grains that would rip the algae filaments, they actually, where they want to go, they build a tunnel. And this tunnel is like this gooey mucilaginous sheath that goes before them. And then the little, rods, the little filaments, can go down this wonderful subterranean, a subway system that's underground. So if you look at the left-hand circle, you can see these filaments of algae. It's actually the bundles of the filaments inside the little strands, and those strands are holding because they're gooey, they're holding those grains together. If you look even, move your microscope to the next part down, next, magnification, and you can see on the right-hand circle, all the algae filaments inside. And we used to call these, what do you call it? Blue-green algae, and now we call them cyanobacterial. It's the same thing, cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. But they're all in these little rods covered by this tunnel of gooey stuff that allows them to slide through all those soil grains. So what we end up having in this soil crust is a really effective living glue that's holding everything together. And this living surface of soils, no matter how many different characters are in that, it can just be maybe cyanobacteria, some algae, or it can be fungus in there too. It can be liverworts, it can be mosses, whatever combination of that. There's a couple terms that we use. cryptogamic soil, which is like hidden soil, um, the biological soil crust. Oh, come on, there's a whole bunch of other, Tim, tell me some other names. There's a whole bunch of words for it. Yeah, cryptogamic crust. But today I'm going to call them biocrusts. Okay, so when I say biocrust, you know, it's this whole big cast of characters underground. Now they are doing this job perfectly, even in their deep sleep, when they're under the spell of no water. And they will keep doing that unless they are smashed by a car going across them, by somebody walking through on a soil crust that looks darker than the rest of the soil. And you hear it crunch like little cornflakes or whatever. Well, you are busting all these little tunnels. And so they cannot then continue to glue the soil together. And that's why it's so important to try to keep biocrusts intact as much as possible. They can be very old. A young biocrust is like 500 years old, and most of them are thousands of years old. But if you even run like a motorcycle along a biocrust in a line, the wind and water will come over and go underneath that crust and start eroding it. And it's just like a rug, a carpet at an entrance of a doorway, and people start walking over it. The carpet starts pulling back and you get this big hole. Well, that's what happens if you do a cut across biocrust. So they do their job terrifically, rain or shine, wet or dry, unless they're disturbed. If they are disturbed, this is the result. We do get soil erosion that's picked up by the wind. And the things that are in the wind isn't just stuff that's kind of annoying, it kind of makes you cough. That's the bigger particles, which are called particulate matter 10 microns or so, which is a, you know, a bigger size, a little bigger than a human hair about. And those are annoying, but there's even smaller particles that are picked up in disturbed soils, and that's PM 2.5s. Now, those are particulate matter that are 2.5 microns or smaller. And those are the result of combustion. So it can be from our cars, from a forest fire, factories, things like that. So those PM 2.5s come out in the air, and then they eventually settle on the soil. And if we keep our soils intact, then they're kept intact. But as soon as we disturb the soil, we are releasing everything from PM10s down to 2.5s and less. The smaller ones of those, well, even PM10s cause problems, but PM 2.5s are pretty dangerous. And they can cause, as you see here, a host of human issues: coughing, wheezing, bronchitis, asthma attacks, high blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, and premature death in people with heart and lung issues. So it behooves us to try as much as possible to prevent disturbing intact soils wherever possible. I also didn't say this is where people are getting valley fever spores. And, you know, I was working with some archaeologists when I was with BLM, and one of them actually got valley fever from sifting the soil at an archaeological site, and she was breathing up that dust. And so she was getting those valley spores. So you just have to be really diligent if you're going into an area that has all this, you know, pull out those old COVID-10 masks, you know. So now we're going to go even deeper down, where the plant roots are actually connected in partnership with a special group of fungi. And these fungi are extremely good at absorbing minerals and nutrients, nutrients and water from the soil. And they can go out and just get wonderful underground sponges that can pull all this together. Meanwhile, the plants above ground are very good at capturing sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and turning it into sugar. So they're making all this sugar, but their roots have a really hard time pulling moisture and nutrients out of arid land soils that are pretty much devoid of both of them. So you have a great sugar producer up here, a food producer up here that's having a hard time sucking up, all the stuff that it needs. And then you have a great sponge underground that's great at sucking everything up, but it can't make its own food. So what would you do? You would partner with them, right? It's only logical. And that's what has happened. So the plants have partnered with a special group of fungi that's called mycorrhizal. And we are hearing more about this today. How many of you have already heard of mycorrhizal fungi? See, yeah, it's so, we would have said that 20 years ago, you go, what? But now we're finding out that this is a huge part of life on Earth. So what's really neat about this partnership is besides the fact that the plant needs an absorber and the fungus needs a producer and they get together, that's so cool. But there's even more going on than that. We have found out that there is a huge line of communication between the two. And so these fungi underground that have no eyes know when an aphid attack is happening to their host. And they go, all right, we've got to get really nasty tasting stuff quick up there to the leaves. So they'll bring in compounds, more of them, so that the plant can make bitter tasting things like alkaloids and glucosides and terpenes and all these things that we say, the bitters that are bitter on the front of our tongue. So the plants are going to start making those because the fungi says, we have to protect our host. Give them everything, give them all the weapons that they need to make the stuff so that it doesn't taste as good. And by the way, let's tell all the other plants in the neighborhood that they're going to get attacked by this too if they don't do the same. So the information from that one plant goes through the mycelium of the fungi, which is the vegetative body of this fungus. And it goes through and says, up, everybody, aphid attack, prepare for this. Get the nasty tasting stuff up there as quick as possible. This information goes like lightning through there because the fungal threads of the fungus that are connecting to all these roots is only one cell layer thick. So here's a cell and here's a cell. When it goes through, it doesn't have to go through a pathway of cells. It's going like lightning. And wherever two mycelium cross, they can fuse. So we don't just have like one thread going from one plant, like this thread going from me over here to Tim Krantz. We have all of these connections because I'm connected to Orchid and Orchid is connected to Tim and Tim is connected to Orchid and me and everything throughout it. So when a piece of information needs to go, it goes the quickest route available. And it can be just in a matter of an hour that information from one plant that we know through injecting it with radioactive isotopes can move through the plant, through the mycelia, and be detected in another plant nearby. So it's like our internet, the way that our internet has been designed with multiple hubs. So when information goes, it can go out from a variety of hubs and it's really, really fast. So this has caused a lot of scientists in the past to call this underground network of root partnering fungi with the roots the Wood Wide Web. So, it sounds kind of funny, but it's really true. And if you look at a graphic representation of our internet, the fungus underground is doing that. It's doing it right now. There's been because that there is this sharing capacity, sharing food and nutrients and information and things like that. Another name for this partnership has been called a subterranean swap meet. And I think that's very fitting as well. So all this happening, underground is very interesting and exciting. But how do we really know it's there? Well, every so often when you're walking along, you might see a mushroom popped up in the desert. You don't see very many of them. Can you still hear me with this on? You can? Okay. Do I need to talk any louder? It's okay? Okay. Sorry. It's a little loud for me. Okay. I'll just talk a little bit louder, okay? So, okay. So the kind of the root system of these root partnering fungi are little threads that are called mycelium. They're thin little hyphae called mycelium. Is that better? Okay. Okay. Well, if it gets too hot. Okay. These little mycelium are a huge underground network that spreads out so far from a plant, it's hard to believe. And they are connecting plants sometimes miles away. The really fascinating thing to me about this whole mycelial network is that there's way more mycelium underground than plant roots. And the plant roots are a small portion of this three-dimensional doily of threads underground. And so it makes you wonder, well, you know, how much food is the mycelium, is the fungus taken from the plant in order to get a fair swap, you know, of food and nutrients. Well, in this picture, I'm just showing how much of the underground is the mycelium, and you might have, you know, one mushroom come up like that. And maybe you won't even see any mushrooms. We'll talk about why that would be in a minute. But if we, and the picture I have there, the photograph is mycelium growing onto a plant root. So you can see that mycelium is generally white, and plant roots are generally yellowish, orangish, or brown. So this is like the only picture I'm using that isn't my own picture, but I got permission from the scientist who did this. Nobody else on the internet does, because everybody uses this picture. If you've looked up anything about mycorrhizal fungi, everybody uses this picture. And it's Dr. David Reed from the Royal Society in England, and he gave me permission to use it. But I should have asked him, because I keep thinking this picture is like from the 80s when we first started thinking about mycorrhizal fungi. I think he stole his ant farm from his daughter. Do you know those little ant farms that are two pieces of plexiglass and they put dirt in them? And he threw out the ants, put in his own soil, put in some little mycelial spores and a little teeny pine tree and grew it. And what this picture shows so well is that here is the plant, the root of the pine tree, and it just comes down here, this little orange thing like this. Uh-oh, sorry, I touched something else. Where did I go? Here. And there's one other root that comes down like this. So I'm so sorry. I'm accidentally clicking on something. Those orange roots are the only things that belong to that pine tree. Everything else you see is all the mycelium. Now that mycelium is going out probably up to maybe 700 times the surface area of the plant root itself, going out on a search and rescue mission to find all the nutrients and all the water it can and bring it back to the plant. So they're doing a lot of work for that plant. What is the plant doing? The plant is giving up maybe 20% of its sugar to the mycelium so that it can go out, spread farther, and bring in more goodies to the plant. And it behooves the mycelium to go out as far as possible and explore new things. And maybe they've even found a little mouse died over here, and they go up and get some of those goodies and bring that in. So it's a really good trade, because for just 20% maybe of its sugars, the plant is getting probably hundreds to maybe 1,000 times more, what would you call it, ROI, return on investment, for that, putting that out. So I have and this whole relationship between the plant host and the mycelium is what is called mycorrhizal. Myco just means fungus and rhizal means root. So it basically literally means root fungus. And that mycorrhizal refers to the relationship. So it's a mycorrhizal root or a mycorrhizal fungus. mycorrhizae would just be the relationship. It's not an entity, it's the relationship. And over 90% of all the plants on the earth are mycorrhizal, meaning they have an intimate relationship with a partner forming symbiosis with the fungi. Now, every so often, the vegetative roots will. Do you have a megaphone? Okay, sorry. For those of you who are watching remotely, we have an air conditioning system that wants to talk louder than me. So she's trying to deal with that. So any rate, to go back to mycorrhizal fungi, every so often when the conditions are right, this vegetative body, all underground, this three-dimensional vegetative body will go, oh, we want to put up some spores to spread, but it's dry soil. We can't do anything. We have to wait till it rains. So we get a big rain, and then the mycelium can go, okay, we can push this up. So they produce a mushroom. It comes up, it pokes up through the soil, opens up to spread its spores. So what you see above ground is a tiny bit of the huge iceberg underground. It's a tiny little blip of what's happening underneath the ground. And it's just coming up to spread spores so that it can start new mycelium in another situation. And maybe there's even more goodies over there or more plant hosts that haven't been inoculated. So if you don't see mushrooms, does not mean that there's not a huge mycelial network underneath. In the desert, there's even less mushrooms. You can guess why. That pop up because it's just too hard. I mean, I've seen people with a jackhammer trying to get through some desert soils, and we expect this little soft mushroom to come up. The little illustration that I did with the base of a tree and those mushrooms, that's a depiction of a pinyon tree. And out where the roots are still absorbing away from the trunk, where there's no bark that's covering the roots, that is the place where the roots are still absorbing. And that is underneath the drip line and a big area around and underneath the drip line. But close to the tree, there's no more absorbing roots because it's all been covered with bark. It is now structural support, but it's not absorbing anything, which is why it drives me crazy. I'm sure it does you too, Orchid, when people water their tree right by the base, and they're either going to cause root rot or the tree's going to die of no water because it can't absorb water there. Neither can it allow a root partner to come in because it's just barked over. You can't get in there. So where do the root partners connect? They go out, see, they know where the drip line, they know where the absorbing roots is, and it's out underneath the longest branches. That's where the fungi can actually get in. And when this happens, it's so cool because it has to be a two-way partnership. The root has to agree to let the mycorrhizal fungi in. And some fungi, well, what happens is often there's a drip of sugar right at the very tip of the root. And it's like, I got candy for you. Do you want some of this? And so the mycorrhiza comes over and, oh, sugar. Okay. And then they do some kind of a handshake deal. I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows exactly the chemical password that happens. But some species of these fungi grow around the roots and then make a little hyphae in, and other ones just grow right in and grow into the plant root. Two different methods of getting in, but I think it's so neat that it's an agreement between them, and it's a lifelong agreement. As long as the plant host is alive, the mycorrhizae will live in that arrangement. So those two main types of mycorrhizae, one that grows inside or, well, first of all, we'll start with outside because that's what I did here. The ectomycorrhizal grows outside of the plant root, and they produce mushrooms. This whole group, the ectomycorrhizal fungi, produce mushrooms that come up. The other ones that grow directly into the plant root are called endo, like inside, and those do not produce mushrooms. So how, you ask, do they spread their spores if they don't come above ground to do that? Well, it turns out that these are the two types are represented inside these circles. The one on the right, the ecto, you can see it has mushrooms that come above ground. The one on the left, the spores stay below ground. And sometimes they're loose, sometimes they are in little packets that you would probably recognize as something that costs a lot of money if you buy it and put it in your food. Do you know what that is? It smells to pigs and dogs. They can smell it underground. Truffles, exactly. So truffles are an endomycorrhizal fungus that relies on smelling like the pheromone of a mammal so that mammals go, oh, where is she? You know, and they start digging and they dig up the truffle. And the wild, they get eaten, but there's a whole bunch go out. What we have done is we have trained dogs and pigs to find those for us, and we give them a wonderful treat for finding them. But we do not let them eat the truffle because they're going between $3,000 and $6,000 a pound. So you don't want the dog or the pig to eat that. So they wear a muzzle and they go find these truffles, which grow underneath oak trees and beech trees, and very hard to find. So, at any rate, that's just the two kinds, just so that you know that there are that. Whichever you're in, there's about 90% of all of the plants in the world have a partnerships with the endomycorrhizal fungi. But that, excuse me, 90% of all plants in the world have a mycorrhizal relationship. But in our arid soils in the desert, 90% of all of our relationships with mycorrhizal fungi are endomycorrhizal. And you don't have to make big notes on this. And remember, it's just the fact that if you can't push hard compacted soil up, you're not going to even try. You're going to keep your spores below ground. It just makes sense. But I want you to know this. So when you're walking across the desert and you go, Robin says there's mycorrhizae everywhere and there's not a mushroom in sight. That's because they're all underground. They're staying mostly underground. When a gopher goes down or a kangaroo rat or a mouse or a squirrel makes its burrow and piles all the dirt out there, there's all the spores and they're getting distributed that way. So anyway, just because you don't see mushrooms in the desert, I just want you to know it's all happening under your feet. And I want to just make a quick note that not all mushrooms are mycorrhizal. There are ones that are not connected to plant roots that love to eat dead things. And we thank them for that because they help the whole nutrient cycle. They break down dead things. They're not living off of live things. And some of these, and they're called saprophytes. And it sounds like an awful name, but we eat a whole bunch of saprophytes. Our saprophytes that we eat are like oyster mushrooms, maitake, lion's mane, shiitake, and morels. So I just want you to know that not all fungi are mycorrhizal. There are other ones that eat dead matter. So we're going to come above ground just for a quick peek because this is another thing where the top is really affecting the bottom. So the plants in the sunlight are going to be breathing in carbon dioxide. They're taking that carbon from the air in the light and turning it into sugars, putting the sugars down into the roots. And below ground, the roots, because they're in the dark, they can't photosynthesize. So they're breathing out carbon dioxide. So the plants above ground are breathing in carbon dioxide. The plants below ground are breathing out carbon dioxide. And this makes a huge difference. It's not just a little, what do you call it? Just a little side, issue. It's what we're all relying on right now for these plants to help us take an overabundance of carbon dioxide out of the air and try to get it down in the soil. And so these plants, just by their own living, can really help us with our current climate issue. So I would like to show you now how this storage of carbon underground in desert soils is really happening on a molecular basis, because if you get it on the molecular basis, then you can see how it spreads out. So we're going to do the microscopic look again. On the round circle there, the fungal mycelium, the little threads, are stained blue. And this is one that's actually growing into the plant root, which is the more white colored thing on the side. So right here, the fungal mycelium is growing into the plant root and it's going to be delivering water and nutrients to the plant. But right there where it joins the plant root and grows into it, so it's actually having to like split to grow into it, it's breathing out carbon dioxide. And remember, the roots are breathing out carbon dioxide. So now you have carbon dioxide from the root and carbon dioxide from the mycelium, and they're blowing that carbon dioxide into an environment that's moist. Okay, so there's water. And in all of our desert soils, we have an abundance of calcium. Why? Because it doesn't rain enough to dissolve it. So it just builds up in the soil. We have a whole bunch of calcium. And if we have moisture down there and we have two entities breathing out carbon dioxide, you have carbon dioxide in water with calcium. And what you end up getting is calcium carbonate. Okay, calcium carbonate. Who among you has caliche in your yard? Do any of you have caliche? You are so lucky. But I'm just saying, calcium carbonate forms little crystals that eventually get bigger and bigger and can form whole layers of calcium carbonate. And the colloquial word for that is caliche. It's a very hard, dense, compacted soil, but it is full of inorganic carbon locked in time because of this biological outbreathing in the dark. Let's see. So I went to one of Dr. Michael Allen's lectures. He's from UC Riverside. And this was probably about, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or something. And he showed this picture. Afterwards, I said, Michael, you have to let me use that picture. And he said, okay, this is a microscopic look at just what I explained to you. On the left-hand side is the plant root, and that little thin thread going in the middle is a fungus. And up at the top shows where both of them had breathed out and are forming a caliche crystal, a calcium carbonate crystal. And it's forming right there at that mycelium. And he was able to get, at the moment that it happens, this is conception, you know. So this is where it starts. And what it can result in is big, either chunks below ground. It can start it can start actually at the surface, and it can go all the way down to groundwater. And I brought this piece of caliche just to show you. Let me see, for the people at home. So this is caliche, or calcium carbonate. It's very, very hard, very tough. This piece can be holding carbon if we just left it protected like this, put it in a box, 100,000 years, we'll still have all that carbon, you know, done. If we want to release the carbon, I just take my water, I'm not going to do it, pour this on there, and it dissolves the calcium. So it unhooks from the carbonate and releases the carbon and dissolves the calcium. And that's how you release, it's a way to release carbon from calcium carbonate. This happens whenever we blade big areas in the desert. As soon as the plants are gone, there's nothing else to continue putting carbon dioxide, carbon down into the ground. And the mycelium will die. Their plant host is dead, so the mycelium will die. So everything starts releasing the organic carbon right away. But also, as soon as we get weather, we get wind erosion, water erosion, then you're going to start releasing the carbon from that whole area that you have disturbed the soil surface. So that's, what's fascinating to me is that in areas of the desert that used to have a lot more a greener environment, more lush environment, when we used to have more water. We used to have, like Johnson Valley used to have tree ferns and, all that kind of stuff. There are caliche deposits that are probably 100,000 years old underneath there. that are staying there unless, oh, let's build a solar farm and take out, I don't know, it's only going to be like 10,000 Mojave yuccas. And we're going to build a power plant, solar plant that'll probably be good for 15, 20 years. But we're going to get rid of all those individual living carbon sequestration units to build a 10 or 15-year solar thing. And, you know, that kind of thing just kind of, it seems backwards to me. I'll just say that. So there's something else that fascinates me about this whole relationship. And our most commonly occurring mycorrhizal fungi in the desert are the endomycorrhizal fungi. And every single little thread of those mycorrhizal fungi are covered with a coating that is taken from the carbon above ground, turned into the sugar, eaten by the fungus, and separated into its parts. And the proteins and the carbon are actually used to construct a semi-permeable membrane along every inch of all of the mycelium. That semi-permeable membrane is called, I call it glomalin. I've heard it also called glomalin. I like glomalin. And glomalin it's made from the carbon the plant breathed in. It's like somebody took Thompson water seal and just painted the whole, all the mycelium with it. It keeps the moisture in, it keeps potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, it keeps all the goodies in, but it lets the things out that it doesn't need, but it keeps all the good things in. I mean, it's just this magical semi-permeable membrane. It can live, it can even outlive the life of the mycelium that it's on. It's, and let me just go to my next, what was my next slide? Let me see. Yeah. After the mycelium dies, it can continue keeping nutrients together and gluing soil together for between 30 and 100 years after the mycelium is dead. And so even in death, glomalin is still working for us. It's keeping, actually, in this point, it's organic carbon it's keeping underground, and it's put it into a form that is now like glue. So it's gluing all the soil together so that erosion is much harder to happen. And this will continue for, you know, decades after it's dead if we don't disturb the soil surface again. So there are estimates that glomalin is storing about 1/3 of the world's soil carbon, you know, by something that most people have never even heard of, storing 1/3 of the world's soil carbon. I think that's pretty cool. Its ability to store carbon and nitrogen and a lot of other necessary components for life of plants. It's so kind of magical that scientists are sort of tempted to use the word magical, but they resist because they're scientists. But I think if you ask them in private, is glomalin magical? And they go, yes, glomalin's magical. It's so cool. So when I first heard about it, I said, I've got to test it. So I went and I started picking up soil chunks and seeing if there were any mycelial threads, because in our desert, 90% of those mycelial threads are from an endomycorrhizal fungi, which produces glomalin. And I picked up this chunk, and there were mycelial threads all over it. The wind was blowing about 15 to 20 miles an hour. And this chunk had these big chunks of thing blowing along with this teeny thread holding these chunks on. I mean, this kind of looks like Avatar, I know, but this is real live with glomalin holding onto these like the tightest glue in the world. So, and actually glomalin, not just me saying it, but other scientists that are doing this research have said that glomalin is perhaps the most important glue in the whole world. So, very cool. What? Oh, okay. So this whole system of things all going together is is doing these fabulous things, and nobody's watering it, fertilizing it, tending to it. All we have to do is protect it. That's all we have to do. If these systems aren't disturbed, then plants will continue to capture carbon and send it underground, and the living crust is going to keep the dust down for us. The root partners will store glomalin, will create glomalin and store organic carbon underground. The roots underground are another thing. The whole desert to me is an upside down forest. If we turned the whole desert upside down, there would be huge, I mean, we're talking 150-foot tall trees we would have. Mesquite definitely has roots that are at least 150 feet deep. If we turned that around, we would have 150-foot trees in the desert. We would have all these huge things and these little bitty plants underground. But instead, we see this and we think there's nothing there, and all this is happening. And there's been a lot of evidence. In fact, Dr. Michael Allen and his group had shown that mycorrhizal relationships are occurring all the way down to groundwater, and that's where the roots stop, is at groundwater. And so all this stuff is actually happening at depth. So very cool. So the only thing that can stop this, like I said, is if we scrape the soils in arid lands, which is happening a lot because we say, we need places to make more solar, and we need more energy. We've got these AI data centers, more energy. We've got to blade more. When we do that in the desert, we're not just erasing the plants that are currently photosynthesizing, capturing carbon. We're releasing tens of thousands, in some cases up to hundreds of thousands of years of stored inorganic carbon that we will be releasing. And is that compromise? Are we coming out? I don't think so, because I know that the technology in our industrial scale solar plants that they're building right now is not going to last. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? 20 years? 10 years? And they're taking out plants that are over 2,000 years old that are all sequestering carbon for us. So at any rate, and it just, one of the things that gets me about arid land soils being disturbed is that you're not just affecting the area. Just say that 5,000 acres is bladed for an industrial scale solar project. You're not just affecting that 5,000 acres. The way that soil erosion happens, well, first of all, you can be tens to hundreds of miles away from that disturbance, and you're going to be breathing in the PM10s and 2.5s that are now released because the soil crust is gone and all of these things are being released. There's also the issue that the plants that are established now across our deserts and arid lands, in most places around the world, are hundreds to thousands of years old. They were established in a time when we had more rainfall. And now with the rainfall being so sporadic, and even though we might get a deluge from a rain cell that's right here, there may be 2 years that goes by that we don't get any rain. And a plant that even can live 2,000 years, if it can't live through the first summer, it's not going to get established to live 1,000 years. And if our rainfall is so sporadic that a little seedling cannot get its foothold enough by the first summer and it dies, then we're not going to have recruitment of a 2,000-year-old tree because it can never get started again. It's really difficult right now to find seedlings in our desert of pinyon pine, California juniper, even scrub oaks, because the rainfall now is so sporadic. And even if we had, terrific rain in one year, if a sprout starts, it's prime directive not to grow up here. Just get enough leaves on it so that you can produce enough sugar to grow a root that'll grow down to about 3 years to go water. If you're just going for a year, you're probably not going to make it. If you're going for 2 years, you might not make it to the last 2 years. But if you can get that root going down for maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you might have a chance to live through your first summer. So you can live 2,000 years. So anyway, that's what I see about this. And by scraping an entire intact ecosystem in the desert, The recovery to pre-disturbance levels of like cover can take like 50 to 300 years. But to fully restore the functionality of that landscape that had plants in it that were hundreds to thousands of years old is going to take the hundreds to thousands of years to get back to the functionality that we just released in maybe a week of blading. So we really need to think before we blade. And actually, I was working with a science team over the last couple of years. We almost got you on the team. The 30 by 30 team. Well, we were very frustrated because we were trying to give California Natural Resource Agency and California Air Resources Board the information that they needed to include the desert in California's carbon map. And they were saying, well, we can't really do that because the desert's carbon is all inorganic and we can't manage for inorganic carbon, so there's no sense in putting it in the carbon model. So we were kind of going ballistic, and every other habitat in California had somebody sitting at their table of the Expert Advisory Council. And we had nominated actually Tim Krantz to be on ours, and they said we didn't get it in time, so we didn't have anybody sitting at the table. We were going pretty ballistic about this. So we ended up, our science team wrote we'll have it right here, a 33-page report about the California desert's contribution to both biodiversity and carbon sequestration in our deserts, to try to convince them to include the desert in the planning for 30 by 30, which is what 30% of California are we going to protect by the year 2030. And the criteria were biodiversity, carbon storage capacity, and well, we used to call it equity issues. I don't know if I'll get the hook for saying equity. I'm sorry. This is not a political talk. Okay. How should I say? Access by underserved communities to places where they could go out and recreate. Okay, those were the three criteria. And they said that the desert was low in biodiversity, which is totally not true. And they couldn't manage for inorganic carbon. So there's no sense in talking about carbon in the desert. Our response was this 33-page thing. And now if any of you guys are advocates and you're fighting anything where they're disturbing large, amounts of land, I'll send you a copy of this report. There are sections that are very technical because we had to speak to the modeling scientists at the state level. I ended up asking them to come down on a tour, and I toured them through the desert, and actually they're coming around, coming around. But if you want a copy of this, the sections that I have written, I tried to take the very scientific sections and make them a little more understandable. So there is understandable science in here. I'm happy to send you a copy of this report. I've got just a hard copy here you can look at to see if that's something that will help you in your advocacy. The things that we have in here are how much pre-disturbed land there already is in California, the number of acres, and the number of acres California needs to put solar on at the technology that we have today, how many acres we need, and we have like twice as much already disturbed, fallowed, open land, canals, everything else to more than meet our energy goals for California without disturbing one more acre of pristine desert lands. So at any rate, if this can help you, then let me know and I'll send you a copy. Oops, I missed one. Oops. Okay, so I've already kind of covered this, but just to kind of wrap up the whole idea, are we doing more to damage our planet by destroying the best carbon sink we have? We really need to be smarter about where we put our developments and, to get the best outcome for everything. And my thing is just, leave our hidden soil magicians alone to do their work. And if we just let that happen, all this stuff is going to be working for us without $1 of input and 1 hour of work going. So I've just presented to you this whole mycorrhizal relationship on a landscape level. And I have just a couple of slides about how this works in your daily life. Do we have time for a couple more slides, do you think? Okay, all right. So first of all, oops, come back. Okay, how can you increase the action of mycorrhizal fungi on your own, in your own garden? Number one, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but don't disturb the soil surface, or as little as possible, because if you do, you will disturb any soil crust you might have, and you'll disturb all the mycorrhizal relationships that are underground. Number two, try as best you can, if you have the ability, to leave little islands of native plants while you're developing the rest of your property or whatever you're doing. You know, even if it's like a demonstration garden that you're doing in a place that's already native, leave as much native little islands as you can. That's the sourdough starter for the soil. That's all the mycorrhizae that are growing, and you plant things around it, and they can easily connect into the wood wide web, so to speak, very quickly, because there's already you know, the sourdough starters kit, the mycorrhizal fungi spores and living mycelia underground. And number three, collect and spread leaf litter from native and arid lands plants into your own garden plants. The spores of a lot of mycelium will be in leaf litter. And if you take the leaf litter and put it where you are gardening, you're a step ahead. These are just some mushrooms that came up in our yard in the leaf litter. And so, you know, you can just see this is where spores like to hang out. It's in leaf litter. Also, if you encourage earthworms, that'll really encourage mycorrhizal, you know, relationships in your soil. Worm castings themselves have really high concentrations of mycorrhizae. And I love this, that people have called earthworms the intestines of the soil. And they do help your plants absorb nutrients and increase the water intake. And this is partly because of the mycorrhizae that they are helping to distribute throughout your garden. A question I get is, can I actually add mycorrhizal spores to my soil? And yes, you can. You can buy mycorrhizal spores. One of the things is, they're not all the same for every habitat. There's a little cast of characters for riparian plants and different ones for coastal sage shrub and for chaparral. There are some general species that are in all of them, but they're going to be a little bit different. And so far as I've seen, has anybody ever seen mycorrhizae sold by habitat type? Because I haven't either. Okay, I'm just asking. You know, but it's what I think would be best. But at the very least, whenever I'm talking to a nursery, I ask them, are you inoculating your plants with mycorrhizal fungi? And 99% of them aren't, but a couple of them are. And I say, that's really good, because they've already got the starter kit in the soil. And one thing to remember is that mycorrhizal spores can be killed by sunlight. So always cover your spores with soil. And a question that I get is, do all plants respond to mycorrhizae? Well, not all of them do. The ones that don't, I have no idea why they don't. Mustards, mostly, but everything, all the Chenopodiaceae, the pigweeds and things like that, some buckwheat species. So this is what it don't even worry putting mycorrhizal spores on these plants, because they go, what's that? Beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, cauliflower, collards, mustard, spinach, and for some strange reason, blueberry and cranberry. So those are just impervious. I don't know why. They're missing out, because here's what I call the mycorrhizal relationship. If you belong to that relationship, you are part of the Root Partners Club. Now, the Root Partners Club has special benefits and privileges. You get more resources in for less resources going out. You get, besides everything I've talked about, immune boosting compounds are gathered and delivered to the plants by the mycorrhizae to make their host more immune to disease and bacterial infections, fungal infections, because the more healthy the host is, the more healthy the partner is going to be underground. So why would you not want to be a part of the Root Partners Club? I don't understand. If anybody knows, tell me why these guys refuse to be part.
Some of them are actually just taking from the existing.
That's true. Oh, and there's some weeds. I'm happy to hear that you're going to have a weed guy come in because weeds will take from the network and not give anything back. That's true. Invasive weeds, except for the mustard. Yeah. So I just want to show you that this is in our yard. We planted a pinyon pine and the mushrooms came up in what looks like a fairy circle. And so we know exactly where the absorbing roots are by looking and see where the fairy ring is. So, because that's where the active roots are. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this whole tour underground. And I think that it's fascinating that the biggest contributors to soil stability are actually the tiniest of organisms. And that's what's holding our deserts together. And I really believe that if people could see these intricate systems at work in our desert, that they would be more likely to help protect what we still have, you know, in the ground. So I just wanted to say that I wrote this book about the desert underground. An environmental attorney begged me to write an article for a paper to present to San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors and about what was happening because they were voting on the renewable energy element of the general plan as to whether or not they were going to allow any future large-scale solar projects inside the community boundaries of unincorporated areas in the desert. Does all that make sense? It's like, are we going to let solar go in right next to this house in Lucerne Valley or in Daggett or in Newberry Springs? Or are we going to say, you can't build any more large-scale solar here, you have to stay outside the community boundaries? Community boundaries are where all the houses are. And people bought out there to be out in the desert, and they wake up and the whole place is being bladed right up to their fence. And this has happened. So everybody was up in arms and said, you've got to change the renewable energy element to not let them do that inside community boundaries because that's where the people are. So we go to this. Okay, so I was asked to do this paper and I started writing it and I said, and my husband Doug is here. He's a marine biologist. And I bounced everything off him and I said, is the Board of Supervisors going to read this? He said, they're not going to read it. Scientific paper, citations of the bad research. He said, they're not going to read it. I said, okay, so maybe if I put pictures in it, you know, pictures of the desert underground. I go, nobody has pictures of the underground. What do we do? And so I said, well, maybe I'll drop this picture this sketch I have with all these plant roots because I've been measuring the plant roots. And I said, I don't have time to do that. So I called a friend of mine who is a scientist. She's now a PhD that I got to do. I convinced her to do her PhD on mycorrhizae and Joshua trees because nobody has ever done it. She's done it. She's great PhD. She's now, you know, one of the foremost Joshua tree people. And I said, Juniper, can you make this sketch into a picture before the Board of Supervisors votes on this? So she ended up doing that. And I said, okay, to my husband, I said, instead of going to make a scientific thing with a couple pictures, I'm going to make a picture book with a couple of scientific labels. So that's what I did. So we presented that at the Board of Supervisors. And I have to say, I know you guys, a lot of you are activists. Have you ever been to a hearing where the realtors are sitting on your side? The realtors were sitting on our side. I couldn't believe it because they got up and said, if you vote to let all these inside here, we have right now 3 escrows that are going to fall out because nobody wants to live here. It was just amazing. And the only people on the other side were the electrical union that was going to be out there for what, 2 years and then leave. So anyway, presented this. I actually printed all this stuff out and made little booklets for them and everything. And they voted right there, and they voted to no longer approve large-scale solar projects inside the community boundaries of unincorporated areas of all of San Bernardino County. So that's the origin of this book, because then, of course, there's like, what, 500 people? I mean, I've never seen, there were so many people, and they all wanted a copy of the book, and it wasn't a book. So that's how this came to pass. And that's, that's it. So there's a copy of my book here you can look at. Unfortunately, we almost ran out. We're getting them reprinted. If you do order them, be patient. It's probably going to take a couple weeks before we get the next batch back. For you today, I have complimentary copies from the Cemetery Institute of a water-wise native landscaping guide that has all the plants that are water-wise, low water use plants that grow in the desert. And a lot of these can grow here in Riverside area. But it's a big guide that tells how to, kind of how big the plant gets, how the frost it can take, who pollinates, all kinds of stuff. So there's one of these free for each of you. And I do have one other, questions. Yes, I have questions now.
Because it sounds like you're winding up to stop, so.
I'm worried about your time. I think I went over.
Fine. If anyone who needs to leave will have left, but they're really not leaving online, which is where they usually drop off.
Okay, so I'm available for questions. Sorry.
So, Miranda Hernandez asks, the biocrest stays in the upper surface layer, question mark? It doesn't follow roots down or anything further down?
No, it's a good question. The soil crust organisms are all autotrophic, which means they make their own food. And the only way they can do that is to be receiving sunlight. So they can't grow any farther down than sunlight can penetrate. Okay.
Okay, so the next question is, should tree wells be shaped like donuts so the water collects at the drip line?
Yes, she got it. Yes, when people make a basin around the trunk of a tree and they put a bubbler right next to it when it comes out of the pot and they leave it there forever, it's like buying a pair of shoes for your 3-year-old and saying you still have to wear those when you're 20 years old. You got to wear the same shoes. No, you've got to just keep moving the dripper out and out and out. Just go underneath the drip line. That's where it is. And the best thing is to make a moat around, like a donut shape, underneath the drip line, and then water however. You can put a soaker line all the way, or you can, just water with your hose and move it, just set it on a timer. That's the way to water your plants. And it not only delivers water where the roots are, you avoid root rot. Because if you just soak bark eternally, it's gonna rot. Okay, so you're protecting the tree from root rot and you're actually delivering water where it can absorb it. Yes.
Laura Vertigo asks, do you think there are more haboobs occurring in the Arizona desert because of all the new construction?
Whoa, that's a good question. I would say, now I have to admit, I don't know. I haven't done research on that. My guess is, yeah, haboobs are huge dust storms that come almost, they look like a wave above ground with all this dust. And I don't even think you could get a haboob in undisturbed soil. Does anyone know that? Can you get a haboob in undisturbed soil?
Generally not, the crust is gonna protect us from that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is that the crust would protect you. The fact that there are bigger haboobs could be a combination of changes in the atmosphere because of the overheating now. The wind that we're getting is way higher than we used to get. The windstorms last January 6th broke our weather station. So we don't even know how high, and we're in Morongo Valley. We don't even know how high the storms got, and we've had that weather station for like 20 years. So there's higher winds, there's longer periods of dry. We are disturbing more soils to develop. And I would say it's probably a combination of all three of those, but we are getting bigger and more frequent haboobs in Arizona. I didn't even know what a haboob was 15 years ago. Did you?
And then one more question from Miranda, which is, she's in the high desert in Victorville and her mom's backyard is almost 1 acre of Storksville. And so how does she remove the invasive without disturbing the soil too much?
Oh, yeah. So Storksville is fillery. It's also called fillery, erodium. And it was probably brought to our country on the ballast of ships. When a ship would unload its cargo in one country, in order to have enough weight at the bottom of the bow to hold it up, they would take soil from that country and then go to the next country. You know what I mean? So the ballast of ships has moved around a whole bunch of invasive plants. And I believe that erodium or Storksville is probably one of those. It depends on how big of an area she has to try to get rid of this for. If it's a smaller area, I would say take a low chair, a low, little beach chair, and your beverage of choice at we call it wine 30. At wine 30, we watch the sun go down, and you just sit there, you talk to your partner, and you just start pulling the weeds around you by hand. I do not believe in hose or hula hose, either one, because it's the way that if you use a hula hoe on your property to get rid of your weeds, what you are doing is absolutely ensuring that you're going to have weeds the next year. Because weed seeds have kind of wimpy roots. They can't get through compacted soil very good. They like loose soil. So, and then people somehow they think, oh, these nice green plants are so pretty. And they leave them while they're green and while they're producing their seeds. Then they turn brown and the seeds are ripe and ready to fall off. Then they go, oh, I've got a weed. So they go get their hula hoe and they think they're doing such a good thing by hula hoeing their whole yard to get rid of those things. And what you're doing is sowing next year's weeds, because by the time it's brown, the weeds are mature and fertile, and you are planting them for next year yourself. You are doing that yourself. So my husband says I should have a little pin here with a hoe on it with a big, don't do it. Don't do it. One way is to pull them. If they're taller weeds, I say get a weed whacker and use the weed whacker. Every time you see them flower before they go to seed, whatever it is, like mustards and stuff, just do the hula hoe, but don't disturb the soil. Every time you disturb the soil, you're guaranteeing another maybe 3, 4, 5 years of weeds. And if you do it every year, then you've got weeds for your whole life. The other way that you can do it is get a layer of mulch, and chipped wood would work. And I know it sounds like a lot, but if you can put 2 inches of chipped wood or mulch or something like that on your weed patch, whatever it is, as that decomposes at the bottom of the mulch, it's going to be so hot that it'll burn weed seeds in it, and they will not be able to come up. But depending on how big your area is, say you have an acre of weeds, that's going to be pretty hard to cover the whole thing. And I would say one way to do it is pick an area, like an area you really want to reclaim from the weeds. This is my yard. And you just say, I'm going to take this part and I'm going to put my chair here in the middle. And every night I'm going to pull a little bit, have my drink of choice, watch the sun go down. And I'm going to put mulch just right here. Then you at least get rid of that. And then you move your chair over to the next part and you do the same thing. Maybe if you just take it in bite-sized pieces, you can do that. For big area, no, erodium, Starksville stays pretty small, so it's really hard to use a weed whacker to get those down. That's why I'd say if you can just do a little bit at a time, and if you can get them before the little Storksville turns brown, then you're good. If they're still green, that's great, because even if you leave some on the ground, they're not going to germinate. So at any rate, let me just tell you something. I have an informational website. It's called The Power of Plants. And I have different articles on there to try to help gardeners, as gardeners to tackle things like weeds. So there's one little blog thing on that. It's powerofplants.com. And I've got a whole chart about all the different options for weeding. And I've got a happy face or sad face on which ones I condone and which ones don't do. And there's a whole discussion there. So I think it's called to hoe or not to hoe. That is the question. Okay, did that help? Hopefully. Oh, are there any questions from the room? Okay.
That was fantastic.